Good evening, everybody. My name is Ken Rosenthal, and I'm a park naturalist at Gulf Branch Nature Center. We are going to talk about some really amazing camouflage tonight, and I hope that you'll enjoy it as well. So, this is Cryptic Camouflage Critters, and I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen and show everybody my. Oops, I'm going to stop presenting because I want to make sure I have the sound also included. There we go. All right, let's try that again. All right, hopefully everybody's seeing my screen. I want to go ahead and start the presentation. Uh, there we go. I always like to have, uh, a good title screen. These are darters. I believe they're tessellated darters. And you can see they are really tough to see against the sandy bottom of whatever water they happen to be in. If it's sandy, that it makes them really difficult. A little easier to spot against rocks. And we'll talk more about that later. But we're going to talk about camouflage. And to get started, many of you know I like I like my big words. And camouflage is, and I thought this was really neat. I actually pulled some definitions off of Wikipedia today because I really liked how they had them written. And camouflage is the use of any combination of materials, coloration, or illumination for concealment, either by making animals or objects hard to see or by disguising them as something else. This is a green tree frog. You can find these in our region. I don't know that we found them in Arlington County anytime recently. I think historically they probably were here. I don't know that they're something you can find regularly right now. We have one on display at the Nature Center. Plug, plug, plug. But you can find them in and around Huntley Meadow. Excuse me. You can find them in Huntley Meadows Park, and you can find them south in areas of areas around here. I've seen them in Occoquan. I've seen them in uh, I can't Juliet Wetland Bank and the state park that's right there. Um, Oh, I'm blanking on that too. But all those areas along there, you can find these guys, and they're really, really neat. They're really pretty, and again, they do blend in quite well. I actually got lucky. I happened to spot this one from the other side of the leaf because its shadow was shining through. It happened to be sunny at that moment. That's the only reason I saw this frog there. So, what's important to remember is that camouflage is in the eye or the eyes of the beholder. We have for uh, organisms pretty good eyes. Our eyes do really well. We can focus in and out. We can focus up close. We can focus far away. We have good depth perception. These are all really, really positive for what we have. We have rods and cones, so we see black and white, and we can see color. We can't beat an owl for um, eyesight at night. We can't beat an eagle or a hawk for what we're able to see at a distance, but our eyes are really, really good. That coupled with our brain often can make camouflage seem sometimes a little, I don't want to say trivial, but a little like, nah, does that really work? And what we have to remember is we're looking at camouflage and how it can help animals blend in. We're also considering that the animals that are trying to catch these other animals are may not have the eyesight that's as good as us, or works as good as us, or have the brain power that we have. And so those are two things that can make camouflage sometimes seem not as good as it can be. And again, I hope to surprise you with a couple because there's some really neat camouflage here, but it also has to do with looking for it. And I think that can be a key as well. If you're not purposely looking for something that's concealed, it's going to be a lot easier to hide from it. My cousin and I used to quote spy on my aunt next door for fun, and she didn't know we were out there spying on her, and she couldn't see us. We were so loud and clumsy, she always heard us. But if you're not, if you're trying to conceal yourself and something isn't purposely looking for you at that time, it can be a lot easier to hide as well. So these are all things I want you to think about when we talk about camouflage. And eye location is a big deal. On the right's a barred owl, on the left's the rock pigeon. These are both birds you find in Arlington. Having two eyes on the same side of your head, in this case the owl, means that you have, if you can see in the diagram here on the right, you can see there's a lot of overlap between what each eye sees. And that darker area is the binocular vision. On the other hand, on the opposite example, that is the pigeon, whose eyes are pretty much on either side of its head. And so you can see a lot more around you, but most of that is monocular vision. There's not a lot of overlap between the two visual fields where you'll have binocular vision. Binocular vision is all about depth perception. And that can really, really be important for an animal that's trying to conceal itself and hide. It can depend on that versus an animal that isn't. The other idea for that, if you're a predator that's sneaking up on a rock pigeon, you may also benefit from that monocular vision not having as much depth perception, and that may help you as well. So, and coloration is not just for concealment. I want to make sure I talk about that briefly too. Um, there was somebody historically who wrote that all color ultimately comes down to concealment, and that's simply not true. The coloration of a peacock obviously is very much about attracting a mate. We have a lot of critters around here that use their colors to attract a mate. I think the classic example, the example that most people know, are birds. There are a lot of bird species where you have a dimorphism between the male and the female. Dimorphism is a fancy word for two colors. They're two appearances. And you have a male that is very, very colorful and a female that is not. These are all birds that have dimorphism. You can see the difference between the two in the bottom here. These are northern shovelers. And you get the green head similar to a mallard, much, much longer bill. But you can see the difference between the male, who is very, very godly colored, if you will, and that's about attracting a female. The females all have more cryptic coloration, coloration that's going to be helps conceal them, makes them harder to be seen. The same can be said for the cardinal. A lot of the hummingbirds, the females are much less brighter, especially around the head. They don't have the gorget, that really pretty patch under their neck, which can be purple, which can be red, it can be different colors. And so the females have less of a hard time camouflage as well. Same for a lot of the warblers. On the right, this is a American redstart. So those colors serve that purpose. For a male like the cardinal, that's his color year round. That never changes. He is hoping to be pretty to find a female, but he's also red and he's bright red, and that doesn't change. For some of the birds, they do actually change between their plumage. Many birds change their feathers twice a year so that their feathers don't wear out, and so having new feathers also gives you an opportunity to change your wardrobe a little bit, if you will. And so this is an American goldfinch. On the left is the goldfinches that we will see in the summer. That's their breeding plumage or breeding coloration that helps the males attract a female. On the right is the winter plumage. It's much less bright, and it's harder to tell male from female in the winter as well. And again, I call it breeding versus non-breeding plumage, which is really good. When you talk about migratory birds, you can get confused with winter versus summer because it's summer wherever they end up going. But if you're just talking about around here, it kind of is summer versus winter plumage, but we'll stick with breeding versus non-breeding. Some ducks even do this as well. They have an eclipse plumage. So this is a male mallard, and in the corner of that picture, you can see the female. And notice the difference in color of the bill. That's how you know that's a male versus a female when they're in the eclipse plumage, which is this right here. This is and black ducks, American black ducks also look similar to female mallards and males that are in their eclipse plumage or this non-colorful plumage, and that can be confusing as well. But that bill will often help you in that case. So here we got a male mallard in the non-breeding season, and it's out of that plumage. And it's probably a lot easier to avoid being noticed by predators and other critters when you don't have that bright green head and that bright plumage on the side as well.
Ken, excuse me a
Yes,
moment.
sure,
I'm
sure.
seeing you on the main screen, and your subjects from your screen are just little mini stamps in the corner of my screen.
Uh-oh. Is anybody else seeing the same thing? Not to single you out, Connie, but
Well, exactly. Am I
yeah.
doing something wrong?
No, mine is fine. Mine is
Yeah, Connie, it might help you to log out and log back in and see if it corrects itself.
Okay, I've got it now. Thank you.
Oh,
Sorry.
very good. Cool. Yeah, no, that's okay. I want to make sure you're seeing all this. I worked really hard on this, Connie. I want everybody to see it. But thank you for letting me know. So, birds are kind of that classic example of having this pretty coloration to attract a mate, but they're not the only ones. This is a family of flies that are called signal flies, and it's mostly in their wings. You can see they'll have really, really pretty wings. On the left, this is a really common one. This picture wing fly. I don't remember the name of the second or third one, but the one on the other side is called the peacock fly, and I think you can see why. It's a very, very, very godly colored, even if it is just black and white and gray. Still quite a striking pattern. And that peacock fly will actually stop and hold its wings above it, like perpendicular to the rest of its body, and move them out and really, really signal the females. And I often will see this on this one you can see it's on wood, but I think this might actually be the top of the fence around our pond at Gulf Branch. I've seen them on railings. I've seen them on all kinds of different surfaces, just out there, just signaling away, hoping that some female will notice them. And they don't stick around. Like if you get close, they take off. But they're really, really pretty little flies. And again, they're tiny, easily can sit on my thumbnail with a lot of space to spare. So birds aren't the only ones. And there are some reptiles that do that as well. And most notably, a lot of the lizards. Some of them, like these anoles that have dewlaps. And the nice thing about a dewlap is it's retractable. You can fold that back against your body so you're not walking around with this big red patch of, hey, here I am, for everybody to see. Because there's also a value to that green coloration that anoles have, as well as far as camouflage. And there's brown anoles. Those are two really good camouflage coloration. So it spends a lot of time camouflaging, but it still has this big dewlap that it can display or show, and that's for both territory and attracting a mate. Like, a lot of these colorations sometimes come hand in hand with a camouflage aspect as well, which is why I want to talk a little bit about them, and then we'll get back into camouflage. Some have a coloration that warns off predators, like honeybees. It actually looks kind of like it could pass as a camouflage here as well, certainly on this kind of milkweed, which I think is also called butterfly weed. But it's got this orange bloom. You can see it's hard. But again, not every flower is going to be orange, and not every flower will then allow you the ability to hide. But when you have a coloration like this, you really, really want to make sure that people are seeing you. And so this striking striped coloration is actually really common among stinging insects, and some variation or another. And it's obviously successful because so many different organisms have developed it over time. And it probably um, reinforces itself because we have good vision, and I hope everybody can see that we got 6 very different critters here. We got a yellow jacket in the upper left. We've got one of the paper making wasps in the bottom left. In the middle is top is a stink bug hunter wasp. I just love saying that. And the other one that's cool name on the bottom middle is a bee wolf. Upper right is a cicada killer. All very striking names. And I think this one here in the bottom right is a wool carder bee. Wool carder bee. Um, but they all have different types. I think everybody can see they have slightly different shapes and proportions and different kinds of the pattern, but it's roughly always the same. It's brown and white, or brown and yellow, or black and white, or black and yellow. Um, and so you've got all these different colors, but it's roughly the same pattern. It's a striping pattern, light and dark. And it says, if you don't leave me alone, I will sting you. And it's not very good for camouflage, but it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to stay on. It's the exact opposite of camouflage. They want to be noticed so that you know to leave them alone. The downside of this for these critters is that somebody has to have that experience in order to know to avoid them. So you've got to get stung, or you got to try to eat them, and then you get stung in your mouth, or whatever the case may be. That sounds horrible. But you've kind of got to have that experience in order to understand that you need to avoid this pattern. But again, that pattern is so successful, and is so I think well known in nature, that you have critters that will also imitate it. Upper left is a beetle, bottom left is a fly, and on the right is actually a wasp. These are all wasp and bee mimics. Some of them, like the one in the lower left, is called it's often called the news bee, because it'll stop right in front of your face. And there's an old story that it was telling you the news in the morning. It'll actually buzz really loudly. In fact, I think it buzzes louder than some bees, and it's trying to give you that impression that it is an angry bee and you should give it space. And it's big. This is some of the syrphid flies. Those are hover flies, and those are the flies that often have these bee colorations. They're not very big. They're kind of tiny, and you don't see them as often because they're on the leaf and then they're gone. But they do hover a lot. But this one is really large. It's a really, really good size one. And then again, this is a locust borer in the upper left, and those colors will actually also help it often disappear, especially in goldenrod like this. That color can actually be a pretty good camouflage as well, with all that yellow behind it. So they're hoping to fake you out into thinking that they can do something that they really, really can't. by having the coloration of an insect that actually does have the ability to sting and hurt you. So this is called aposematism. Um, Not the last three because they're fakers, but the bees, this coloration is saying, "Hey, leave me alone." Or something bad's going to happen. And so it's the opposite of camouflage. It's the opposite of trying to hide. Here's a ladybug. Most ladybugs have in their knees they have a poison, and if you bite and chew on a ladybug, breaking up their legs, the joints in their legs releases this foul tasting liquid and this toxin, and a lot of animals after eating one ladybug spit them out and they avoid them. And the same can be said for monarch butterflies. Monarchs spend their larva hood, if you will, is a caterpillar chewing on and eating milkweeds and accumulating toxin from the milkweed plant that makes them distasteful. And it used to be, this was another one where they used to think that there was a couple of imitators out there, but it turns out all three of these butterflies feed on something that makes them distasteful. And so all three of them are really more like all the different bees that have the don't mess with me or I'll sting you pattern, and that these three patterns all advertise that they are distasteful, and it's reinforced by the three species. We do have viceroys around here. That's the one in the upper right. Looks just like a monarch, except for that line in the middle of the back wings there that tells you it's not a monarch. But this one on the bottom is a queen, and you can see it's got a lot of extra white spots, a few more in the wing cells than the monarch does. But they all have roughly that same um, pattern, and it reinforces that they are distasteful. The monarch and the uh, queen are very closely related. They have the same genus. The viceroy is in a very different one. It was thought, and again, it was thought for a long time that these two were just piggybacking off the monarch, but it's been found recently that they are both actually distasteful as well. Speaking of the monarch, not only is the adult brightly colored to be avoided, but so is the caterpillar. So is its larva. They're both advertising. They both kind of stand out, even though the caterpillar spends a lot of time on the underside of leaves, still trying to hide out and not get seen because someone's still got to eat you to figure that out. But it's important to remember that the stage in between here, between the larva and the adult, between the caterpillar and the butterfly, is the pupal stage. And in that chrysalis, well, they're still going to go with the old tried and true camouflage. And it's going to be really, really hard to find these camouflage chrysalises, chrysalises, the plural of chrysalis. You're going to find hard to find them in all that greenery when they go in and pupate, and that's the whole point. Is it's not easy to find them. If you find them when it's really really dark in color, it could be that the monarch is getting ready to emerge. Excuse me, but it could also mean that it's been um, parasitized, which is no fun for the monarch, but that other critter's got to eat as well. Um, these guys aren't even going to try to uh, camouflage at all. In fact, they're in a big group to make sure that you can see that color. These are large milkweed bugs, and they are distasteful as well. And even their nymphs advertised as well. Unlike the four stages in butterflies, these guys only go through three. They hatch from an egg. They're these nymphs. They get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they're an adult. And they all have that orange and black coloration that says, "Hey, don't eat me because I don't taste good." The only time you won't see it is when you've got that last um, is when they emerge from a mold. Until their exoskeleton hardens, they don't have their full coloration. So this is really kind of a dangerous time because they're soft. They're hoping that everything is hardening in the right place, that they don't have a bent wing, they don't have a bent limb, anything like, those kinds of things are terrifying. By the way, on the about 4 o'clock on that seed pod, you can see, I don't know, I'm not always sure how much people can see my mouse, but you can see there's an empty-ish gray mold, and I'm guessing that's probably the old exoskeleton of the milkweed bug now that it's an adult. And they won't molt again once they're adults. They have wings. That's the last, they went through their last molt. But until that exoskeleton hardens, um, they don't have their full coloration. So it's kind of a double whammy because their exoskeleton's soft. And they're much more vulnerable to predation at this point. And it's this bright color because it hasn't hardened to give them that warning coloration yet. And maybe that serves as a warning coloration too. I don't know, but I do think it makes them more obvious, even amid all the other similarly colored large milkweed bugs there. It makes them more obvious from the others. If there's a predator, that would be the one I would probably cue in because it'd be an easy one to find. Um, I'd like to think that most of us are familiar with the warning coloration of a skunk. You don't leave me alone. You're going to smell really bad. The honey badger has very similar coloration there. It doesn't smell really bad, but it has a really bad temper. It's not an animal you want to mess with. It's very fierce, and so that coloration is still a warning. It's just a different for a different reason, but it is saying, hey, you need to leave me alone because it's not gonna end well for you. Certainly not gonna end painlessly. And so they both have those kinds of um, colorations that are saying, hey, leave me alone. You can also fake out the predators. This can be an important tool as well. This is an underwing moth, and we'll come back to that in a second here. Diamatic behavior or a startle display is a way of bluffing. You may not have a defense. You may not be able to sting or smell bad or bite back or scratch or be poisonous. But you're still going to try to fake them out or bluff them out and make yourself look scarier, look bigger. Sometimes just being bigger helps. But you're trying to in any way change the idea in that predator's head that you're going to be a good meal. This is a frilled lizard, which I'm pretty sure is one you typically find in Australia. I think that you've got to be in that Australia, New Zealand area to find these guys. And they're kind of a slender lizard, and they probably look like an easy meal. And then you get too close as a predator, and boom, this whole frill pops out around their head, and it looks can look pretty intimidating, and it's got the mouth open and it's this whole threat display. It's like I'm gonna really mess you up if you get too close, and whether the lizard does that or not, it wants you to have that idea. For a big predator, this might be even more important because the lizard might be much less likely to try to tussle with it if it can. And so this is that diamatic behavior. When we have it closer to home as well, that's the moth I showed you earlier. Throat's getting very dry. And this is an underwing moth, and this whole family of underwing moths, it's a whole genus, I believe, are very cryptic in coloration, very camouflage, can be very hard to spot. Even on this wood grain, it was not the easiest moth to spot compared to some of the other ones, which are much more brightly colored. And this moth will often sit on trees, in the bark, and really, really, really blend in. And if you get too close, what they'll do is ever so slightly begin to open those back wings. Let me do it so you can see. Open those back wings just slightly, and all of a sudden there's this bright coloration, or it might even be eye spots. And it suddenly you think that you're looking at something that's looking back at you that's much bigger than what your food was. And this could be a startle. And it doesn't have to make you think that there's this really amazing or large critter. It just has to give you that half a second. And sometimes that half a second hesitation, that second hesitation, is all that moth needs to get away before the predator can grab it. You fly away and land on another tree, and hopefully that camouflage works, and then it's hard to find you again. Um, I will say that I don't know if it's because I'm big or because I'm clumsy, but every time I run into one of these, I try to get close. I try to get those wings to open a little bit, and all I get is a moth that flies away. So I've never seen that happen like that. I've seen lots of pictures. This is a specimen on the right that's actually pinned, so it's not going to look like that when they spread those back wings. It's more like, again, like the one on the right, and then the wings just ever so slightly part, kind of like curtains on a stage, and you just suddenly there's this flash of color. You can also add um, looking entirely scary to that. These are all swallowtail caterpillars. The two on the left are tiger swallowtail, the same individual actually, and I think the one on the right is it's either a pipe vine or a oh, I can't remember the other one. It is not it's not a tiger, if as I remember correctly. And they all have a very snake-like appearance, and so they can still be cryptically colored. On the left here, this one's very brown. It doesn't stand out much. This green here is going to be hard. It's not going to be easy to spot against a green background of like leaves. But what they'll also do is they instinctively may rear up to look more like the snake that they have the eye spots to kind of fake you out for, and again give that predator pause or get it to leave. This is one where these guys aren't going to fly away, they're just going to hot foot it down the tree and away somewhere. You just don't move that fast, so they really are hoping that if that coloration is what they need, that coloration is going to make them look scary enough to get the predator to leave them alone. Oops, there we go. And now let's throw some noise into the mix. So this guy is very cryptically colored. These are Carolina grasshoppers. And those really long wings. You can often find them on bare patches. This one was I think this was when it was in Colorado, but I typically often see them in a place I visit up in Massachusetts where there's a dirt road, and I'll go out when there's no traffic around, and just they'll pop up and fly away like crazy. It's always fun to see them because a lot of times I don't see them ahead of time, even though I'm looking for them. They're very, very well camouflaged. And I'll show you another species that's similar that uses the beach habitat a little bit later. But what happens is if you get too close, the caterpillar just or the caterpillar, the grasshopper jumps up in the air to fly, and when it flies, its wings have a bright pattern that start flashing, and so that can be disoriented and make it look bigger. It can give you that startle reflex, and sometimes this species can do it. Some other species can do it too, whether they have the flight or not, where they snap their wings and make a sound, and it's called crepitation. And snap, 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 snap. And that can be really, really, again, startling for a potential predator. And so this is one of those multi-pronged defenses where you go from being hard to see to being really, really bright and startling and loud, and then boom, they land back on the ground, and you're like, where did they go? And so because the other thing I think that helps is if they get up in the air and you get a beat on them, and you're like, okay, you see this big flash that's flapping, and you get this big shape, and then all of a sudden they wrap back up and hit the ground, and you're like, where did they go? And so a lot of these critters will use that kind of getaway as well to help conceal themselves. So yeah, let's get back to camouflage. Did a lot of talk about these other colors and to show how, excuse me, some of those strategies use cryptic coloration as well. Well, let's talk about it. And again, I think for most people, if you talk about camouflage, the first thing they go to is color. We have a color pattern that people wear, especially when they're hunting or paintball, whatever they're trying to do or recreationally, and they're trying to hide. We have camouflage, and you start to see different patterns of camouflage for different types, whether it's in the Arctic, whether it's in urban areas. There's all these different kind of camouflage. People always think about um, uh, uh, soldiers in the armed forces wearing the camouflage depending on where they're going to be. And I think generally people think of green. It's always the first one, and it makes sense. Green seems to be the most popular color for camouflage. There's a lot of green out there. There's so many different plants. There's so many animals that live on plants. There's so many animals that try to take advantage of that color. These are all critters you can find in the region here. On the left is a green stink bug, which, yes, it does have another um, method of defending itself as well. And their nymphs are actually very brightly colored. There's orange and yellow and black. It's just the adults that are more green like this. In the middle is a green snake. I know one was found in Arlington, I think a couple years ago. But to me, the best place to try and find one of these guys is to go again to Huntley Meadows. They have them there as well. That's where this photo is taken. And then on the right, this is a caterpillar. This is an inchworm. It's that traditional inchworm we think of. And a lot of the inchworms, if I remember correctly, are moths in the geometer family or geometer moths. And they tend to be these inchworms. And so staying still and straight. I don't think this one even moved when I was doing this. Can make them really, really hard to spot. And so this is an inchworm caterpillar as well. But there's other colors out there that can be successful in hiding. This is yellow. This is a moth here on the left. This is another one I found doing the hike and bike trail at Huntley Meadows, and I walked by this um, flower and just paused because it seemed like there was a petal in the middle that didn't look right. And I'm walking with my daughter who's on her bike and she just wants to blow ahead. And I was like, oh, come back. I need to look at this for a second. And I think I found two more either that day or the next time I hiked on that trail because I knew what to look for. And once you get that, I, not search engine, but that search image that you want in your head, you can be a little easier to spot camouflage. Still not perfect. I walk around fields all the time, but typically I only spot a mantis when it either lands on me or when I'm actively searching for it. But just walking through a field, if I'm not really keen to it, I'm not going to spot one. They're that good at camouflage, even with our eyes. And this was one of those ones I'd never seen this moth before, and it was really, really cool. And then once I knew where it was and what to look for and what flowers, I saw a couple more. And again, you don't always have to be that color. Here's a crab spider. It's really more white, but those legs can be a little translucent, and you can see they kind of whoops, and you can see they kind of take on that yellow color as well. Because even knowing that even that picture, which is mine, knowing where that spider is, my eyes still click to the higher contrast prey species before I actually catch up to where the spider is as well. But yeah, there's a lot of yellow out there. There's a lot of yellow flowers. There's some critters that can make do quite well on hiding on these yellow flowers. And white's another color of flower you'll see a lot of, and you'll see a lot of critters that are white. Certainly, I didn't even put in any kind of Arctic critters which use white to hide in the snow as well, which can be important. On the right's another crab spider. This one's much whiter, but it's also in this. I think this is I'm not going to say. I want to say it's a bone set, but I'd probably be wrong. But it's in this white plant, and it's very hard because the flowers actually have like this wide head, and so it's just hanging out underneath there. But again, I spotted that spider even after it was hanging away from the flower by the bee it had a hold of instead of the actual seeing it in the flower. That's how good the camouflage is. Neat point, by the way. Crab spiders are known to occasionally to often grab bees from behind after the bees have fed in the flower, so they have a little extra nectar in their tummy, and they have less of the ability to bend and twist in order to sting the spider, which I thought was really neat. And on the left here is a white mantis hanging out on this orchid. And even though it's not quite the same color as the orchid, you can see how it still has a lot of the same colors. And you can see there's a few different colors. Rarely do you see one of these that's just a solid green or a solid brown, solid white. There's always a little bit of texture, a little bit of color changes, and that makes it a little more successful. If your camouflage isn't perfect, you're going to get eaten a lot more, and it's less likely that you're going to reproduce. And so that ones that have the best patterns are usually ones that are able to reproduce it and contribute to the gene pool, and that's how you have the colors that we do now. Um, I don't know if any of you are into any of the superhero movies that are out there, but I grew up reading comics, and I remember when they, did the movies, especially when they did the original Superman one, the costume just didn't quite translate on the film. It was a little tough, and now what you see a lot of these with these costumes is they texture them. So instead of just being a solid blue or solid red or solid yellow, it's a texture that they've got that color on, and it makes it less bright and makes it look a little more like it should be a little more realistic or even believable on the screen. And that's what a lot of these camouflage critters do as well, as they have textures or a second color, so they're not just one solid color, and it helps them blend in even better. And of course, brown. Here's another one on the left with two different colors of brown, and it helps it blend in more because it's not just one brown or one color that's out there in all that leaf litter. And so this copperhead is really got a great coloration for hiding among dead leaves. And then if you're the wrong color, like this prairie dog, for most of this field, you could still blend in your little spot there as well. And sometimes prairie dogs can actually be really hard to spot on the brown. Certainly when there's a lot of brown, but even in these little spots, it's not always easy to hear them or see them. But then they start, calling out and yelling at you, and then you know exactly where they are. So sitting still and being quiet is not always, but can be important for camouflage. And shape. If you're the obvious shape for something, breaking it up or having a slightly different shape can make it harder for you to be spotted as well. And so all of these critters that you're looking at right now, these are all moths. But with like one or two exceptions, they don't look like your typical moths. And these colors are, they've got these cryptic colorations, they've got these patterns that make them hard to spot. Not sure about that ermine moth in the middle there, the black and white one. But most of the rest of these have colors that are going to make them a little harder to see and to blend in. But they also have different shapes. There's tube shaped. There's triangular with a couple of arms out. You've got this T shape with all these spikes, just these different colors and these different patterns that break up your shape and make it harder for you to see. If you think of, when you say owl, most people I think traditionally think of like the great horned owl or maybe the smaller screech owl. They both have what looks like ears. I always think of them as Batman ears. Again, my superhero fandom. But they have those two feathers that look like ears. They're not, they're just feathers. And essentially, the great horned owl gets its name from that. And that's meant to, or it's thought that helps break up their shape and make them harder to spot in and around the trees. And again, for owls, that coloration is there for the daytime when they're sleeping. They don't need that coloration for most of their prey gathering because they do it at night and nobody can see what color they are anyway. I always tell kids, they could be purple or yellow or blue, and you're not going to see it at night. But during the day, when they're trying to sleep, purple or yellow or blue could stand out a lot. And so having that coloration is really, really helpful for not being seen during the day. You can de-emphasize another part of your body. Um, I might be making this one up. I didn't actually read this one, but I remember seeing these butterflies and thinking how striking they are, that they're so camouflaged. And then they have this one yellow patch, and obviously they have these eye spots, and all these colors are meant to get a predator to not bite the end that has the head, the eyes. For the majority of organisms, most of your most of your senses are located in your head. And so damage to your head can be, certainly be fatal, but can also be a big injury that can turn into something that's fatal because you're not able to get to recover from it. And so if you can have a bird that tries to grab at your wings, well, you can still fly with a little wing damage. You can't fly if you don't have any head. You also probably been eaten. And you can see that head on, which is to the left there, is really, really actually pretty difficult to see and well camouflaged. And so camouflage can help hide part of your body if you're trying to direct critters at the other part of your body. Size is really, really big. Um, I say that from a human perspective. Obviously, if the predator is just a little bit bigger than this grasshopper or roughly the same size, then we're dealing at a different scale. But critters like this are going to be much, much harder for us to see. Those are grains of sand underneath it. So this is, a zoomed in picture of a little seaside grasshopper. And this is just a nymph. It's not a full adult because it doesn't have its wings yet. But these guys, if you look at those colors and you look at how the legs are broken up in the little bands there, this is a grasshopper that on the sand by itself is really, really difficult to spot. And they often will do the same thing where you get too close. When the adults, at least, if they have the wings, it will fly away and then they land and you're like, where did that grasshopper go? Really, really tremendous camouflage for that location. Speaking of grains of sand, if you look to the left, this is the same crab on my hand versus on the sand. See how hard that crab is to see. It's small, which doesn't hurt, but it's also having just a tremendous coloration for not being seen in the sand. And you see, this is a tiny crab, and I'm going to tell you, I did not find it by myself. I found this crab because this beetle I was watching ran across the sand. You can see, hopefully, by the grains of sand, how much bigger this beetle is than that crab. You can see the sand's a little bit smaller in that image relative to the critter we're looking at. And I was watching this beetle, and all of a sudden it stopped and like grabbed it or picked it up for a second, and then apparently was like, this is not what I want to eat, and dropped it and kept on going. I don't know why. Maybe crabs are too crunchy. But that's how I found this. The crab was able to pick it up. But these are my fingers. This is the area between, I think, probably my middle and my ring finger. So this is a very, very, very tiny crab. And I would never have seen that in a million years with that good camouflage on the sand and the bright sun. You would never notice it if that beetle hadn't stopped and tried to pick it up. Speaking of that beetle, that is I'm pretty sure it's a bronzed tiger beetle. There's another one called hairy neck, which look very similar. Out on the sand, they're pretty hard to see as well. But there's another key here: speed. And I just told you, I know, just told you that sitting still and being quiet, don't move, shut up. That's really good for camouflage. That's the kind of the gold standard. But for some of these critters, if something gets too close, you pop up, fly somewhere else and land, and they can't see you. These beetles, which aren't, you can see it there, but from a distance, it might look like a pebble unless it moves. You might not notice it or think about it. And the minute it moves, they run really fast. If you get too close, they can fly down, I don't know, 10 feet, 20 feet, 25 feet, 40 feet, and then land. Then you got to refine it again. And it's not, like I said, it's not a perfect camouflage, but you got to remember for a lot of these other critters, it's going to be harder to see. And again, even though they move, poof, they fly and they land and they disappear. I don't know how many of you have ever been birding. I'm a big fan of horn larks. I think they're really, really fun. They're very difficult to spot. And I've always been amazed at birding out in Delmarva or again up in Western Mass where I'm often at in the holidays. You might startle these guys and they come up and they fly. And you get this bright yellow face and you can see where they get the name the horns from. but they are so well camouflaged out in fields, out on bare dirt, that it's really, really hard to see them. So you have them, they pop up and they fly and then go back and forth once or twice, and then they just drop, and you can't see him. He's right there. I'll give you a hint, but they're so very hard to see, and so every year they go and look, and sometimes I don't see them. I know they're out there somewhere, but I can't see them. I always hope that a hawk flies over and it makes them pop up and panic and fly around and land again. Excuse me. A lot of times I'm on a street where, it's not my property, so I can't run out and try to flush them myself or anything like that. It's not very ethical to do anyways. But if you don't have a disturbance, if they're not close to the road, you might not see them. And sometimes I take a scope and I just scan. I'm just scanning and scanning and hoping I see a movement and I know it's them. But if you're just standing there looking with no magnification, no bins, no binoculars, no scope, you may not notice them at all. They're really, really amazing. And again, that's to me, some of that is speed. Like you get too close and they're just like fly and they take off really quick and they go and they land and poof, they disappear. Um, and there's seasonal camouflage. I think we learned about this one at a young age. It's actually pretty extraordinary, but there are ermines and there are snowshoe hares. Ermine's a type of weasel that change their coat, and I think the Arctic fox does it too, that change their coat seasonally. A lot of mammals that live in temperate or colder climes switch out their fur seasonally. They switch it out twice a year. They shed it in patches and regrow it. They grow longer, thicker hair for the winter, and then they do the same thing in the spring, and they grow out shorter, thinner hair. To me, what's amazing, and I don't know that people really think about that, is they're doing what most other mammals might do around here, except they're growing a completely different color. And whatever the cue is in their body, I think that's fantastic. And so you go from having this white fur in the winter to this brown fur in the summer, which again, that doesn't look like it's the best camouflage with all that green, but it's so much better than white. It's such an improvement over white. And so they have essentially a double camouflage depending on each year, seasonally, where they're one color for half the year and one color for the other half of the year. And so that can work out really, really well for them. So, and you know what? If you don't like your color, change it. The classic example of this is chameleons. We don't have chameleons around here. We do have gray tree frogs. Gray tree frogs are tremendous at changing their color. They have the ability to land somewhere and change it. They're slow. They're much slower than some of these other critters. The gold standard for changing their color is the octopus. I'm only going to play like the first 10 or 20 seconds of this, but this is just fantastic, and I want to make sure everybody can see that. So, do you see the octopus?
I have to admit, I was screaming when I got this video thing.
What makes a marine biologist scream?
That's just fantastic. So, whoops, that's not what I want.
Roger Hanlon.
Nope. Let's go. Oh, don't want to give away my next slide yet. These animals have um, cells that have pockets of pigment, which is colored liquid, and they can expand or contract and change their color. Some can do it more rapidly than others. That's a tremendously quick um, color change for that octopus. And I've also seen videos where like the octopus is swimming and it just lands and just it completely changes to its surrounding, and it's just absolutely incredible. They can also show emotion, they can show irritation, they can have just threat displays with that color change as well. So they can do a lot of communicating and not just camouflaging with that ability to color change. I feel like there's even some species that can flash and bioluminesce to entrance potential prey or to ward off predators. Just really, really incredible what they can do with their colors. It's so different from the kinds of things that that we come to expect from most organisms. And it's also important to remember, camouflage is about location, 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 location. This camouflage right here is a really good camouflage, just not in the middle of a yellow petal of a flower. On the left, that crab spider, my guess is it probably wasn't very successful in that plant at that location. I could be wrong, but I don't know how well it was doing there. Same with this tree frog on the right. This is a little frog probably just hatched that year. He's a tiny one compared to some of the other ones we've seen. And he's sitting on top of a oh, mayapple. Sitting on top of a mayapple umbrella, and it just stood out. So if I remember walking out with my manager and seeing that and being like, you both were like, "What is he thinking right there?" It was made for a fun picture. But location can also be important. You know, copperheads already have a really good camouflage, but concealing yourself even more can help. There's as good as camouflage is, having something between you and the critter that's looking for you, or you're trying to hide from, or you're trying not to let see you, is always best. Even this grasshopper on the right here, you can see the legs, but it's still partially concealed, and it it makes it harder to see. It always does a little bit. Not impossible, but just that little bit of extra can help. Certainly, this copperhead surprised me before I took the picture as well. So that location, can be good or bad. Location is always very important. And here's a really neat idea. I always try to share this with kids when I talk about this, is directional camouflage. You know, we live in an area. This is I think this is a uh, pumpkin seed. We live in a world where we can move forward and backward, and we can move left and right. And as humans, and we focus on that a lot. Fish live in a world where they also move up and down in the water column. And so that's an extra dimension to consider with camouflage. Birds have this the same thing as well. And so what you'll find in the fish world is something called counter shading. This is a tiny little smallmouth bass because again it's sitting in my hand. But you can see it's got a light belly and it's got a dark back. Okay, this is called counter shading, and it's a method in which the um, fish are camouflaged in two different directions, looking from up above against the dark bottom of a pond or lake or even an ocean where it's just dark below. It's going to make them harder to see. If you remember the fish I showed you on my opening slide, their back was very well camouflaged to the bottom of the water that they were in. For critters looking up from underneath, that white belly is going to make them harder to see against the light coming in through the surface. Um, there's even critters that have lights that can bioluminesce underneath them to make them harder to see that way as well. Okay. Not every fish needs this. Here's a flounder. If you're sitting on the floor of the ocean and you look like that, you're really hard to spot. You don't necessarily need to worry about it. Although, if this flounder was to swim up, you would see that its underside most likely is still lightly colored. It's still like a white color. Here's a red-tailed hawk. And this is an example of counter shading in birds. You can see that light belly and that dark back. So when this bird's in flight, the back is dark and the underside is light, and that can help make it harder to see in both directions and help give it an edge in either getting away from a potential predator. Not a lot of critters that are going to eat an adult red-tailed hawk, and also help make it harder to see as it swoops down on its potential prey. So counter shading is one of those neat things that you'll see in fish and in some birds, and even in some other critters as well, where it can help with that light belly can often help hide shadow cues and make them harder to see as well, because you don't see the shadow as easily. You can also try to look like something else. Again, here's that one I showed you earlier that was on the yellow flower. On the branch or the stem of plants, it's going to look like a potential thorn. These critters, I found a lot on our red buds in the park. So if you have any red buds in your yard or nearby, it might be worth a look to see if they're there during the warmer months. I think it's kind of late now. And on the right here, this is a question mark. It's a type of butterfly. There's also commas. They look very similar, but they look like a dead leaf. When sitting there, they can be really, really hard to find. Their upper side has some orange on it when it's wide open. If these guys fly and then just land, just like some of those other ones I talked about, they can literally disappear right in front of your eyes and be very, very hard to spot. Um, you can also carry some of that with you. This is a lacewing larva, and weaves. It will often start by putting its own poop on its back, but eventually it'll put all these other things on its back, and it looks like a little bit of fuzz. But if you see a little bit of fuzz and it's moving, it's one of these. You can see the mouth parts right there. They're actually a pretty fierce predator. And you can see the legs here underneath, and it's actually It's trying to get up on my finger. It's not trying to bite me, but those are its mouth parts that are pointing right at my finger. So you can make yourself look like something else completely. This is a caterpillar that's also covered with stuff there. It's kind of an inchworm. And on the left here is an adult moth. Um, and I don't know if I have quite the right angle there, but it's when this moth sits, its wings and its abdomen kind of stick up in the air, and it looks like a knob or a knot, or like a broken off end of a small branch when it's sitting on wood, and it looks like doesn't look like a moth. It looks like a dead piece of wood that you who cares about. And so they have these disguises they can use to hide as well, or look like something that's gross. Both of these moths are thought to kind of mimic bird poop. The funny thing about it is, I'm pretty sure this is called oh, is it a wood beauty? A wood nymph. It's got some really neat names, and one of the names has beauty in it. And I think it's an absolutely gorgeous moth, but I can also see how something else might look at it, especially with those legs splayed out that look like a little splatter. That would look like bird poop or bird dropping. The same with this one here. This is a fruitworm moth, and it also has that bird dropping kind of look to it as well. But put all or some of these together and you can disappear in plain sight. I stumbled upon this moth completely by accident. It was right on the side of a tree, and I'm still not entirely sure how I saw it, because I was not looking for one. I just happened to see it there, and I think it might have been just a little bit too green, but that was a really, really cool moth to find. And again, if you're looking for it, sometimes it's a little easier to find, but some of these critters are really, really good at camouflaging. And remember, they're not just trying to camouflage themselves. It's not just about hiding their body. You might want to hide eggs. This is a eastern tiger swallowtail egg. And yeah, it might be on the underside there, but it's small, it's tiny, it's not brightly colored. And you're trying to hide it using camouflage, because once they lay the egg, the butterflies are gone. They're not hanging out. They're not good parents, by our standards. They tried to hide it, so that's good parenting still. Um, but that's kind of a size kind of hide there. These are killdeer eggs, and they are very hard to see on the ground. Um, and so that's a really, really good example of cryptic coloration in something other than the actual bird. They don't make much of a nest. They nest on the ground. Their young are precocial. As soon as they hatch, they're ready to run with the mom. They're also hard to see. And killdeer in this setting, you got this gravel, you got these stones, and you got all this little plant around it. It's a little easier to see that killdeer. But out on a bare patch of dirt, they're very difficult to spot. Certainly the youngsters and the eggs are as well. Um, or you can put your nest somewhere else. If you have I'm sorry, I'm going to go back here for a second. Everything that sees your eggs is going to be looking down on them. So those eggs need to be really well camouflaged. If you have a nest up in a tree, your nest needs to be well camouflaged, because the chances are you're probably giving birth to altricial young, which means they're not going to be ready to move once they hatch. So your nest needs to be able to not just hide you sitting on the eggs, but also the young after they hatch. And so a lot of nests are made from natural materials, obviously, but it also makes them harder to see. And this is a hummingbird nest, which is made, typically from some small grasses, plant material, also lichens, and probably some spider webs. Um, and generally where it's located can make it really, really hard to be seen. You got all these sticks and all these leaves in front of it as well, which are going to make it easy. And then it's also on a tree, which may or may not already have lichen on it. It can look to another organism like just part of the tree. But when it's up higher, the eggs don't always need to be as well camouflaged in the nest, because the nest itself is more of the camouflage than the eggs. Speaking of camouflaged eggs, this is a glass frog. I think it's called Fleischmann's glass frog. Um, and if you've got transparent eggs, it makes it really, really easy to hide them. You can, like, if you look, hopefully you can see um, my arrow, but I'm at the egg that's in the upper left of the mass, and you can see the line between the two. I don't know if that's a vein or between two parts of the leaf it's on. You can see that line through the egg. So all these eggs are fairly transparent, and there you see that green. And up close they look obvious, but at a distance they're going to be much more difficult. You can see the little embryos that are starting to grow in there. But I also want you to look at that frog. It's practically transparent. You can see some of its organs in there, but look at the 3 feet the two rear feet and the front left foot, they're all over patches of brown on that leaf, and you can see the brown right through the frog. That is fantastic camouflage. A plus. Fleischmann's green frog, grass frog, glass frog. Oh, I'm going to get through it one way or another. A plus is just amazing camouflage, and they're really hard to spot. It's just a really good way of camouflaging yourself. Because they don't have water to jump into. You think, if you stumble upon a green frog or a bullfrog, they're going to jump into the water and swim away from you. This guy's up in the trees in a rainforest and doesn't have water to dive into, so that being much better camouflage is going to help it. Is going to help out with making sure it doesn't get eaten. And again, that chrysalis I showed you earlier for the monarch is that green coloration. This is the side that doesn't have that yellow line on it. And you can see it would be really difficult to spot among all that other greenery there in a field or even in a garden. But there are other pupal cases as well. On the right's an evergreen bagworm moth, and on the left is something called, it's the genus name is Psyche, Psyche, and they spin together several little twigs around their pupil case. So it looks like just some sticks. It's pretty random. And if once you know what to look for and you've seen this, ideally, you can spot these pretty regularly. You'll still see some around that either didn't hatch, or the moth hatched from it, but that's still intact. And I can almost always find one of these on my house. I've seen them many times. So camouflage works for not just the critter, but all these other stages as well. So I think that is my tour for the day for camouflage. So I appreciate y'all coming. I'm gonna unshare my screen and see if there's any questions in the chat. But you can also, if anybody's got any questions, you can feel free to uh, let me know. Thank you, Barbara. I appreciate that. There's no questions in the chat. So does anybody have any questions for me? I know we're right at 8 o'clock here.
Thank you, Ken. It was great, as usual.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Well, you probably heard me stumble on one of those frog names. So if everybody's good, nobody has any questions, I'm going to let y'all go do your other things, and I'm going to go get some dinner. So appreciate you all hanging out with me this evening, and I hope you have a good one.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye-bye, everybody.